Hello, everyone. I hope that everyone is doing well. So yes, indeed, this is our 7th and last session. I want to just begin by acknowledging the wonderful community I've heard from so many of you via email or the exercises platform. I am truly honored when you share your stories with me. And there is something about that feels very, very sacred. And I wanted to thank you because it's really increased my appreciation for the high holidays as well. So today we are going to be focusing on the Ashrei for our primary text. And then and the grammar piece, the new grammar piece, will be a first introduction to the future tense. Last week, we looked a little bit at the past tense. So today, we'll get a little taste of the future tense. So as usual, I'm going to put up my PowerPoint, and then these materials, the PowerPoint and extra text and text exercises will be on the Kamionkowski Beit Midrash Hebrew for the High Holidays part of the My Jewish Learning. I also just want to thank Julie ahead of time because I know we'll run out of time and I will forget to do that. Julie, you have been a wonderful partner in this, and I have come to much more deeply appreciate the wonderful work that myjewishlearning.com does and the resources it provides for the community. So
thank you so much.
All right, let us get to it. I'm going to share. All right, so this week, week 7, focusing on the Ashrei and the future tense. Now, for those of you who have encountered the Ashrei, it is very long. And in fact, the only way to go through it is to go through it over the course of several slides. So let me just say a few introductory words about this. The bulk of the Ashrei, so beginning with the word Aromimcha here, after Tehillah David, the beginning here with Aromimcha is actually the beginning of Psalm 145 from the biblical book of Psalms. And the material at the beginning, where what we call this prayer, the Ashrei, this material is actually taken from another psalm, from Psalm 84, and a little piece from Psalm 114. So the first 2 lines are kind of just a general introduction taken from other psalms. And then the psalm itself begins with Aromimcha. Again, it is Psalm 145. So in addition to a prayer book, a Siddur, if you have a Bible, you can, a Tanakh, you can also find this text in Tanakh, in the book of Psalms. So the first thing I want to point out is that if you look at the first word of each line, Aromimcha, then Bechol, then Gadol, I repeated Gadol, then Dor, Hadar, Ve'ezuz, Zecher, Chanun, Tov, and we can keep going, and we will in a moment, but hopefully you are noticing that this is an acrostic psalm. We saw this with the Ashamnu last week, which means that every pasuk, every verse begins with the next letter of the alphabet. So just going through and in order, and you can see how it continues. And then the mem, the nun line is missing. This is probably a scribal error from back a long, long time ago, that there was a nun line and we lost it. A scribe missed it. But then you can see how it continues with somech, so and the samech, and eine with the ayin, and then our pay lines, and finally our last few lines where we have tzaddik and karov, ratzon, shomer, and tehilot, and this brings us to the end of the alphabet with the last letter, the taf. And then this final piece here is an excerpt from Psalm 115 that kind of closes off the prayer. So the Ashrei itself is primarily Psalm 145 with a beginning and an ending added on to help us kind of open and close the text. The other thing I want to say generally about the Ashrei is that this psalm is usually designated as a psalm of praise. So just a couple of words about the book of Psalms, since so much of our Siddur actually comes from the book of Psalms. Most psalms fit into one of several categories. There are psalms that are lament psalms, where it's like, you know, oi this, my enemies are surrounding me, you know, I feel ill, I'm feeling paranoid, all these kinds of things. God, please help me. So that is a typical lament psalm, and you can have it for an individual, which is most common, or for the community, where all of Israel is crying out to God for help. Then the next most popular or common psalm is a psalm of thanksgiving. And a psalm of thanksgiving begins with the psalmist telling her or his story about a difficulty and how that person has come through that difficulty. And then it opens up into a more general praise and thanks to God for having helped the person through a hardship. Now, the category of the Ashrei is a less common category in the Psalms, and this is a general psalm of praise. So the difference between thanksgiving and praise is that a praise psalm is not situated in a particular event. It is more general. It is a praise of God that is not connected to any particular historical moment or personal moment for someone. And so what we get with these lines are really beautiful and very kind of broad in scope descriptions of the kinds of things that God does for God's people. So I'm going to begin quickly with the opening. Again, this is not part of the psalm itself, but we have Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehalelucha Selah. So happy are those who sit or dwell. This is from the verb yashav. Beitecha, in your house, in your dwelling. Od Yehalelucha Selah. They will praise you, or may they continue to praise you, and then Selah. No one knows what Selah means. It appears in many, many psalms. There are all sorts of theories that this was some kind of a marker, a musical marker indicating a break or a pause or a drum beat. But the truth is that these are all just theories. We really don't know what the Selahs are doing there. And so what I want to kind of point out is that it begins by talking about the joy that comes from dwelling in God's house. And one of the things that I really love about this is it can mean so many different things. It may have meant, when it was first written, visiting the Beit HaMikdash, visiting the actual temple in Jerusalem. It may be also physical space, like being in a synagogue together. It can also, I think, be understood metaphorically in a number of different ways. And one thing I would encourage you to do, if you're inclined this way, is to think about what it might mean for you to, like, what would your definition of dwelling in God's house mean? Right? What does that mean for you? What does that look like for you? And I think it's a great kind of conversation starter in Jewish circles. Because this psalm is so long, I'm not going to have a chance to translate the whole thing. I will provide a reading of it on the extra site that we have, so that you can practice reading the whole thing. And so what I want to do is just highlight some of the verses that I think are particularly beautiful and broad in a way that really allows each reader to engage with the meanings and the various meanings of the text. And then we'll move on to a little bit of grammar. So the very first verse that begins with Aromimcha. So some of you may be familiar during a Torah service when you hear Romemu, Romemu, Adonai Eloheinu. So Romemu is the same shoresh, the same root as Aromimcha, and literally means to raise up. So some people will say to exalt, to raise up. So I will raise you, my God, the King. And how is that done? I will bless you, or let me bless your name forever. Le'olam va'ed. I think we've had it on our vocabulary in past weeks. Forever, these two words together. Bechol yom. So in every day, avarechecha, I bless you. Va'ahalela, and another word for pray, and I praise your name. Again, le'olam va'ed, forever and ever. The ahalela is connected to hallelujah, the part of the service that we recite on the beginning of a new month, and for certain holidays, a part of the service called the Hallel, the praise. So these different words all come from the shoresh Hey Lamed Lamed, and this is an onomatopoeia. So the word halal probably derives from the, I can't do it, but the a kind of praise of God. Let me point out a few interesting lines in the next part as we keep going. Door ledor. So some of you may have heard this. It actually appears in the Haggadah for Passover, dor vador there. So a door is a generation. So dor ledor, generation to generation, yishabach ma'asecha. So generation to generation praises your deeds. Ugevurotecha, and your gevurah, your strength, yagidu, they speak of it. One of the things that really emerges in this prayer are how many Hebrew words there are for speaking. So Yishabach is praising, Yagidu, lahagid is to tell, Asicha also is to tell, Yomeru is to say, Asaprena, another word for to say or to give speech. It really goes on, and you learn a lot about a culture by its language, and the fact that in biblical Hebrew there are so many verbs for speaking lets us know that the importance of speaking honestly and with integrity, the importance that words carry. The whole, sticks and stones may break my bones, but, words shall never hurt me. That does not apply in Judaism. There's a sense that words indeed do hurt. And so a lot of the Ashrei will use different ways of speaking our praise for God. And one of the interpretations that we have for these Psalms of praise is the idea that, let's say you're going to synagogue, you're going to services, and you're feeling kind of down, you're feeling like you're running a little bit low, a little bit depressed. The idea here is by saying over and over again in each line, and each line beginning with the next letter of the alphabet, I praise you, we praise you, we praise you, that by the time you get to the end, you yourself feel uplifted. That simply the recitation of words can actually impact on our moods and our feelings. The other piece, the other theme that kind of runs through a lot of this has to do with God as king, God's kingship. So, kevod malchutecha yomeru, they will speak of the kavod, of the honor or glory of malchutecha, of your kingdom. Ugvuratecha, again, this gvura and this might, this strength, yedaberu, they will speak of it. And so one of the things that you might do when you are looking at this, at the Ashrei on your own, is to see how many times you can find words that are based on the shoresh of mem, lamed, chaf, malach. Right, so melech, malchut, then also verbal forms of that. And then the last part, Tzadik Adonai bechol derachav. So Adonai is righteous in all of God's ways. And God is chasid bechol ma'asav. So in all of God's deeds, God has extends loving kindness. Karov Adonai lechol korav. Adonai is close to all who call out to God. Lechol asher yikra'uhu ve'emet, to all who call out to him, ve'emet, in truth. So speaking with integrity, with the proper kavanah. And then finally, the last line of the psalm itself, Tehilat Adonai yedaber pi. So my mouth, the word for mouth is peh, with a peh and a hey. And here it changes form because it's my mouth. So praises of Adonai, my mouth speaks. right? So my mouth speaks praises of Adonai. And the sense here is that it's ongoing, right? That all of my actions, all of my words reflect, in essence, a praise for God. And then finally, Vayivarech kol basar shem kodsho leolam va'ed. So we are back to Vayivarech. So kol basar means all flesh, meaning all living things, will bless God's holy name forever and ever, for eternity. For those of you who keep kosher, or who know some of the language of kashrut, you may know that that in Hebrew, bisari is meat and chalavi is milk. All right, and then finally, this add-on closes the prayer. Va'anachnu nevarech Yah. We will bless Yah. Yah is another name for God. Me ata, remember our preposition mean, from now. This ata is not the same as the ata that begins with an aleph, which means you. So this begins with ayin, and ata with an ayin means now. So from now, ve'ad olam, and forever, hallelujah. And hallelujah literally means praise Yah. So every time we say hallelujah, we're literally saying praise Yah. Okay, let's look at a little bit of grammar now. One of the things that I'm going to ask you to look at this week, there are many more examples. I've highlighted just a few. I recommend that, again, if you're going to spend time with this prayer this week, that you look for other examples. But if you look at the highlighted words, you'll see that each one begins with a yud at the beginning. So from the first, ya gidu, ya bi'u, yiranenu, yomeru, yidaberu. They don't all have the same vowel, but they all begin with a yud, and they all end with u at the end. So the beginning, if you take a Hebrew root, you put a yud before the root, and then u at the end of the root, you're creating the future tense of they, plural. So yagidu, they will say. Yeranenu, they will rejoice. Yomeru, they will say, or they will speak. Yedaberu, again, they will say, or they will speak. So the pattern for the future tense, and again, I'm not giving you the full paradigm, but just a few forms to start getting used to this, is that we add, the future tense is based primarily by adding prefixes to the verb root. You may recall that last week we looked at a few examples of verbs in the past tense. And in the past tense, we added things only to the end of the word. So I would say, shamarti, I guarded, or shamarnu, we guarded, right? Or shamaru, they guarded. So the past tense is built by adding suffixes to the end. And the future is built by adding prefixes and occasionally u to make a plural. So a yud added onto a base root is going to be he will something. It's a third masculine singular. Then all you do with the yishmor is add u to make it plural. So instead of he, it becomes they. So yishmeru, they will guard. Then eshmor is the first person. So when you add an aleph to the beginning of the verb root, it makes it I will guard. And when you add a nun to the beginning, it becomes we will guard. And there are additional forms for you will guard, y'all will guard, for the feminine forms. But again, I just, this is just kind of like a dipping your toe in the water. So this is the start of the paradigm for futures. The one thing when you are looking through and looking for examples on your own in the Ashrei is don't bother paying very much attention to the vowels. The vowel patterns for the future tense are more complicated, and there are several different patterns depending on a lot of factors that we're not going to get into in this series. So while the vowels will change, you can always rely on the prefix, and in the case of this plural, the u at the end. Let me just take us back to the beginning for a moment. So things like va'avarcha, if you ignore the hey, which here is, again, it's a poetic term, you can see that we have barach, having to do with blessing, with the prefix aleph. This means I will bless. Va'ahalela, so here we have our shoresh, hey lamed lamed. Adding the aleph prefix makes it I will praise. And so you can go through, and this prayer has a lot of the third person plurals. So yomeru, we have amar, our shoresh, basic root, the yud prefix, and the u, so this is they will say. So you'll find a lot of first person and third person. The Ashrei goes back and forth between being in the first person, I will, and then also flips around to, and they will. And this is common in the Psalms. The last piece that I want to cover for today is a review of some of the things that we've learned over the course of these 7 weeks. And this is not even comprehensive. But we've learned that there are masculine and feminine nouns, that nouns can be singular or plural, that they can be definite, meaning the, or indefinite, meaning a or an. And so words like ha-melech, this is a masculine singular noun with the definite marker, ha. We've learned when you see im, that you have a masculine plural noun. And this one also has the hey, so this is the evil ones, the evildoers. Then we learned that feminine nouns almost always have a hey at the end. That's how you know it's feminine. So tehillah would be a praise. I could say ha tehillah, the praise, if I wanted to make it definite. And then finally, that the feminine plural forms have an oats, that they drop the hey and add an oat to the end. So givurot is a feminine plural noun. And you can go back to prior lessons when we talked about this. One of the other things that we've looked at in this series have been prepositions, and the fact that many prepositions actually attach directly onto a word rather than just being an independent word. So the two most common are the bet. So when a bet is put in front, it's going to mean in. Sometimes it will mean other things, but most commonly in. So behol would be in all, like in all that you do, we praise you. And we have looked a lot at the preposition lamed attached to a word that will mean to or for. So le'olam va'ed would be like forever. Two other things that we have looked at are examples of some possessive suffixes. So shimcha, that when you take this word as shem, name, when you take a noun and add cha at the end, you're making it your something. So here, shimcha is your name. So anytime you see cha at the end of a word, of a noun, whatever that noun is, it's going to be your, and then that noun. And similarly, when a word ends with o, on here, malchuto, so when we end with o, it's a marker of his. So we know that malchut is kingdom. So malchuto, his kingdom. And again, if I wanted to add, say, his name rather than your name, I would say shemo, and I would put this here. Again, there are other forms. It's not the full paradigm, but these are the most common forms. So I want to stop sharing. I just put a whole lot out there. The thing I didn't mention is that the Ashrei is traditionally recited 3 times a day, twice in the morning service in Shachrit, and the Mincha, the afternoon service, actually starts off the Ashrei, begins the afternoon service. Again, in the exercises, the material, you'll have an audio recording of reading through each of those lines step by step. I encourage you to look for examples of all of the features, all the grammatical features that we have learned, trying to identify nouns, trying to identify a future verb, even if you don't know what that verb means. A good first step is to recognize that it's future. The last piece that I will add for today is that in classical Hebrew, by which I mean mainly biblical Hebrew, but also in prayer book Hebrew, the future tense is not always just translated as our kind of English future. It's not always, she will do X in the future. But the future tense, the ones with the prefixes, also express an idea of something that is ongoing, that just keeps going and going and going. So if I say yidaber, I can say he will speak, but yidaber could also communicate he speaks. He used to speak, he speaks now, he'll speak in the future, right? Something that is kind of timeless will also use the future tense. So you have a little bit of room to play with the meaning of a lot of these prayers, even just with that piece. Do you want to say will or generally does as you are reading the prayers? Okay. And then finally, putting together this session and working with all of you kicked me in the tuchus to finish a project that I have been meaning to do for over a year, of putting together a handbook, the basics of prayer book Hebrew. So I'm almost done with that. And I will mail that out to anyone who is doing the Hebrew for the High Holidays exercises. So if you're enrolled in the Kamionkowski Beit Midrash to get the audios and the exercises, you're on my mailing list, and I will send you that. It will include what we've done, but more information, a little more systematically, and also a list of the most common vocabulary words that appear in the Siddur. And that may be a useful next step or a useful resource for you to have. And I will put it on my website so that others can also, if you want to direct anyone else to that, they can just download that for free.
Excellent.
All right. And maybe take a few questions.
Yeah, are there any questions? So far, nothing. You answered the one question that was in the chat box, which is, what does Ashrei mean? So you addressed that. Are there any other questions that folks had? You can either put them in the chat or let me know that you'd like to ask a question. We can unmute you. Lots of people are expressing gratitude to you, Tamar, how wonderful this class was. So I want to pass that along. It seems you explained everything.
I did it. I did it perfectly. Everything is answered. I really do want to thank all of you, because it really is true. The high holidays have been meaningful in a way that they haven't in past years, because I've been engaging with you and the prayers and the Hebrew language. And if there is nothing else that you take away from the 7 weeks, here is the bottom line. You can learn Hebrew. Wherever you are right now, you can move forward. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you've studied Hebrew before. It doesn't matter if you're new to Judaism. It doesn't matter if you're not Jewish. It doesn't matter if you have dyslexia or other reading challenges. You can do it. And my advice to you is take joy in it. And if you start feeling frustrated that you're not getting something, just allow yourself to play with it. Step by step, you will move forward. Anyone can learn. Everyone can learn. And hopefully as a source of delight and not frustration.